The ballroom shimmered under chandeliers, 1,000 tiny lights catching on crystal glasses and gold-rimmed plates. My father, Frank Morgan, stood at the center, a man finally laying down the heavy mantle of leadership after 40 years at Morgan Industries. I sat at a corner table, smiling politely, nursing a glass of untouched champagne. Rachel, my sister, was the picture of confidence, circling the room in a deep blue dress, her laughter crisp and calculated. The MC tapped the microphone. Now, a few words from Frank's beloved daughter, Rachel Morgan. Applause. Cameras flashing. Rachel stepped up, her smile wide, her posture perfect. She launched into memories of growing up around the company, of dreaming big, of building something that would last. People nodded, laughed. Then she shifted. And of course, she said, tilting her head toward me with a grin that didn't reach her eyes. Claire always had her own special pursuits. Not all of us were made for boardrooms. Some of us are better suited to more creative passions. The room tittered. I felt the air tighten around me. Rachel's voice was light, playful, but the barb was sharp. She was mocking the scholarship fund I'd created in Mom's memory, the one I'd poured my savings, my evenings, and my heart into. Dad chuckled. A shallow, awkward sound. I caught the quick glance he threw toward Rachel. Was that discomfort? Fear? Before I could process it, my gaze caught Mr. Langford across the room, Dad's longest-standing business partner. His smile had flattened. His eyes were locked on Rachel with something colder than amusement. I straightened in my seat. Rachel continued, painting herself as the natural heir, the dutiful daughter who had stayed close to the family legacy. Her words flowed like honey, but I heard the poison beneath. As applause swelled again, my hands stayed folded neatly in my lap. My face didn't betray anything. Years ago, I would have flushed with humiliation. Tonight, I simply watched, because something had shifted inside me, something I hadn't even known was still alive. But why now? Why would Rachel risk showing her teeth in public, tonight, of all nights? And why did Dad's smile feel like a shield, not a celebration? There was a time I believed Rachel's rise was natural, that she simply worked harder, cared more, stayed closer to Dad when I drifted toward different dreams. When I left for college, across the country, chasing a dual major in business and fine arts, Rachel stayed. She sat in on board meetings as an intern. She shadowed Dad at shareholder events. I thought it was sweet, admirable even. I never saw the cracks forming. At Thanksgiving dinners, she'd joke about how Claire always had the creative spirit while she held down the fort. I'd laugh along, not realizing I was already being written out of the family story. When Dad started talking about future leadership, I still wasn't worried. He encouraged both of us. He said there was room for different kinds of brilliance. I trusted him. But what I didn't know, what I only discovered much later, was that his support came with silent conditions, unspoken expectations. Be practical. Be present. Follow the blueprint. Rachel understood those rules. She played them like a symphony. I didn't even know the music was playing. Years later, over coffee with an old family friend, I heard the story I wasn't meant to know. Dad had once put my name forward for an executive development program, an elite fast track for future CEOs. Rachel had found out. She'd accidentally mentioned to Dad's advisors how unreliable I could be, how I was easily distracted, how I was passionate but not built for corporate pressure. It wasn't malicious, she'd claimed. She was protecting me from a path that would have crushed my spirit. Dad, facing pressure from the board and his own doubts, withdrew my name quietly. No discussion. No confrontation. By the time I graduated, the company had already started shaping itself around Rachel. There had never been a formal erasure. No shouting matches, no public betrayals, just a slow, quiet pruning of possibility. I thought I had chosen a different life. But the truth was harsher. The door had been closing behind me for years, and I hadn't even heard it latch. What else had been decided about my life without me even realizing? It started with an envelope, no return address, no note. Just my name, scrawled across the front in a hand I didn't recognize. Inside, a printed email thread, clipped together. Subject line, succession planning, risk mitigation. My stomach twisted. The thread was between Dad's legal advisor, Harold Price, and Rachel. Discussions about how to protect the brand from potential instability. How certain family members might lack the long-term vision needed for sustainable leadership. They never mentioned me by name. They didn't have to. There was a line from Rachel that stuck out like a splinter. Claire's initiatives, while heartfelt, reflect an emotional volatility that could endanger Morgan Industries' future positioning. Volatility. A word that slipped into boardrooms like poison slipped into wine. I sat there for a long time, the papers trembling slightly in my hands. How long had Rachel been crafting this narrative? Had Dad seen these emails? Had he agreed? Or had she slowly fed him these doubts, one conversation at a time, until he barely remembered why he ever believed in me? I needed answers. I started digging, quietly, pulling old board reports, asking careful, offhand questions to people who still remembered. When Mom was alive, when the company felt different, and then Maggie Jensen found me. Maggie, who had been Rachel's assistant back in those critical years. Maggie, who once adored Rachel, and who now looked at me like someone trying to make amends. We met at a small cafe 2 towns over. She stirred her coffee without drinking. I stayed quiet too long, she said. I thought it was just business, just ambition. I didn't realize how far she'd go. She slipped me a second folder. Personnel memos, internal notes, small things, but damning when pieced together. Rachel hadn't just undermined my opportunities. She'd actively steered my reputation within the company toward irrelevance, and someone, maybe Maggie, maybe someone higher up, wanted me to see it now. But why? Why now, after all these years? And what did they expect me to do with the truth? It would have been easier to believe Rachel was simply greedy, easier to see her as the villain, plotting and calculating behind closed doors. But the truth, once I began piecing it together, was far messier. Rachel had always lived with a shadow over her shoulder, mine. When we were kids, she worked twice as hard for half the praise. No matter how many trophies she brought home, it was my art show, my debate medal, my scholarship essay Dad framed in his office. I hadn't seen it then. I hadn't noticed how her smiles sometimes strained at the corners, how she clutched her report, cards a little tighter, waiting for validation that never quite came. And when Mom died, something inside Rachel hardened. Dad, lost in his own grief, leaned heavily on the child who stayed, the reliable one. Maybe she started believing the only way to earn her place was to protect Dad's legacy at any cost. Maybe she thought cutting me out wasn't cruelty, it was survival. I also learned that Derek, her husband, had been pressuring her quietly, but relentlessly. He had aspirations far beyond what Rachel could deliver alone. He needed her cemented as the uncontested heir, or risk losing status, power, wealth. Rachel wasn't just battling old insecurities. She was battling time. Battling expectations she had once begged for, and now couldn't control. I wanted to hate her. Part of me did. But another part, the part Mom raised, understood something colder. Rachel had spent her life chasing validation that would never come from taking the easy way. And somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that erasing me was the only way to finally be enough. The question that kept me awake at night was simple. If Rachel thought she was saving herself, what was I willing to do to save what was left of me? You can't fight a machine by throwing stones. You dismantle it gear by gear in silence, while it hums unaware. That's how I approached it. The day after Maggie slid that second folder across the cafe table, I drove 3 hours to visit Mr. Langford, the man whose glance of disapproval at the party had stayed lodged in my mind. We sat in his study, surrounded by dusty books and portraits of people who had shaped Morgan Industries long before Rachel or I had even been born. I always thought you had more steel than they gave you credit for, Langford said, sipping his bourbon. And now? He smiled thinly. Now I'm willing to place a bet. Langford still held a block of voting shares, small individually, but powerful when combined with a few other forgotten allies. Old managers Rachel had alienated, quiet shareholders who disliked the direction she was steering the company. Piece by piece, I began gathering them, not with grand promises, just calm conversations, a vision for a company rooted in legacy, but also growth, innovation, meaning. It wasn't easy. At first, some recoiled. They feared Rachel's influence, her husband's reach. A few deals nearly collapsed when anonymous pressure started hitting certain board members, offers to buy them out, thinly veiled threats about future opportunities lost. For a moment, it felt like I was too late, that Rachel's roots ran too deep. That's when Thomas Reed stepped forward. Thomas, Dad's former CFO, quietly pushed out 2 years ago under the guise of early retirement. He had a grudge, certainly, but he also had something better: access. Through Thomas, I secured critical insider knowledge, enough to block Rachel's future mergers and maneuver through proxy votes. But aligning with Thomas wasn't without risk. He was shrewd. He wanted guarantees. His loyalty, I realized quickly, would only last as long as it served his interests. Still, the pieces clicked into place, quietly, relentlessly, inevitably. All that remained was one final move, a move that would either secure everything or expose me completely. And standing at the edge of that decision, I found myself wondering how many secrets were buried under Morgan Industries' polished floors. And when the walls finally cracked, who else would come falling through? The night of Dad's official farewell gala, Rachel glided through the grand hall like she owned it. Maybe, in her mind, she already did. Her speech was a masterpiece, on the surface. She spoke of tradition, of sacrifice, of building for the future. She painted herself as the natural continuation of everything Dad had started. People clapped in the right places, smiled when prompted, but under the glossy applause, there were fractures. Rachel made a misstep, small, almost forgettable. She referenced a charitable initiative she helped launch years ago. Only, that initiative had been spearheaded by Dad himself, a fact well known to most in the room. A few heads tilted. A few murmurs stirred. Dad's expression didn't change immediately, but I caught it. A brief crease between his brows, a subtle shift in his jaw. He wasn't entirely buying it anymore. And then, just before the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new office wing, something else happened. The projector screen behind the stage flickered, briefly showing an old company blueprint. And at the bottom, in clear bold font, a name: Claire Morgan, project lead. A glitch, someone whispered. A technical error. Rachel laughed it off, waving her hand as if brushing away a harmless fly. The crowd chuckled uncertainly, but the moment hung there, awkward, heavy, unresolved. I stayed near the back, hands folded, heart steady. Rachel didn't realize it yet, but her stage was cracking, and the spotlight she so desperately clung to was about to shift. The scissors gleamed under the stage lights, nestled on a velvet cushion. Rachel lifted them, beaming at the crowd, poised to cut the ceremonial ribbon stretched across the entrance to the new office wing. That's when the board chair, Mr. Walters, cleared his throat into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady, almost casual. "Before we proceed, there's been a slight update regarding leadership acknowledgements." Rachel froze mid-step, the scissors trembling slightly in her hand. I stepped forward from the back of the room, not hurried, not dramatic, just a quiet, inevitable movement, like the turning of a tide. The crowd shifted, heads turned, cameras clicked. A murmur rippled through the guests, not loud but unmistakable. Mr. Walters extended a hand toward me. "Claire Morgan," he announced, "acting executive chair of Morgan Industries, effective immediately, per board vote." Rachel blinked rapidly, confusion flashing across her face before she masked it with a brittle laugh. "Of course," she said, voice bright and tight. "We're a family company. It's a family celebration." She tried to turn it into a joke, a warm gesture, motioning for me to come share the ribbon. But before I could answer, another voice cut through the tension. Mr. Langford, old, sharp, steady, stepped forward from me. The crowd. "This isn't a family courtesy, Rachel," he said calmly. "This is business." Rachel's hand tightened on the scissors. For a heartbeat, I thought she might actually fight it, but the cameras were rolling. The guests were watching, and so, slowly, stiffly, Rachel lowered the scissors back onto the velvet pillow. I walked forward, past her, without a word. The ribbon, fluttering slightly in the air conditioning, waited for the right hands to sever it, and for the first time that night, Rachel had no script left to hide behind. Mr. Walters adjusted the microphone, his voice crisp against the stunned silence. "Effective today," he said, "Morgan Industries will undergo a structural transition to align with long-term sustainability and ethical stewardship. No accusations, no public humiliation, just enough for those who understood to hear the weight." Behind his words, Dad shifted in his seat, his hands clasped tightly together. His gaze flickered between Rachel and me, something raw passing through his eyes. Not confusion this time. Guilt. Rachel stepped forward, forcing a brittle smile. "I'm sure," she began, voice too loud in the hush, "that any changes will honor Dad's vision, our family's legacy." But the room didn't warm to her, it didn't reach back. Instead, from near the side doors, Mr. Langford spoke again, this time softer, almost kind. "Sometimes," he said, "legacy isn't about preserving what was. It's about protecting what could be." A few heads nodded. A few faces, loyal to Dad for decades, turned toward me instead of Rachel. Rachel's hands trembled slightly at her sides. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. There was no need. Every word Rachel might have thrown, every accusation she might have made, would only clang against the silence already closing around her. Her fall wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than that, a slow withdrawing, like the tide pulling back from a shore no longer hers, and standing there, ribbon still waiting, cameras still pointed, I realized the battle wasn't about winning the spotlight. It was about outlasting the storm. The scissors were cool and solid in my hand. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment, not heavy with anger, but anchored in something quieter. Certainty. The ribbon trembled slightly in the soft draft of the air vents overhead, its crimson sheen catching the light. Without a word, I sliced through it. A clean, final motion. The crowd erupted into polite applause, the kind reserved for moments everyone knows matter more than anyone dares to say aloud. Rachel stood a few steps away, frozen in place. She didn't storm out. She didn't shout accusations. She simply faded, like a photograph left too long in the sun. As guests began to file toward the new office wing, Dad approached me. For a moment, we simply looked at each other, two lives tied together by blood, by grief, by 1,000 silent failures. Then he extended his hand. When I took it, his other hand covered mine, a quiet, lingering squeeze. Not seeking forgiveness. Not offering explanations, just acknowledgement. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Later, walking through the bright halls of the new building, I paused outside the executive office. A small brass plaque caught my eye, polished, understated. The Margaret Morgan Scholarship Initiative, founded in honor of perseverance, vision, and heart. I smiled. The future I had fought for wasn't built out of vengeance. It wasn't built to erase the past. It was built to carry forward the pieces that mattered, the ones no betrayal could ever take away. Sometimes winning doesn't look like fireworks. Sometimes it's just walking through a door they once tried to close behind you, and leaving it open for someone else to follow.